There are nights you'll never forget, the kind that change you forever. My name's Gregory, and tonight I watched my wife, Jillian, wrapped in the arms of her first love, Troy. At her reunion, surrounded by old friends and familiar faces, I realized I was just a shadow in her life. She didn't even flinch when she told me they were meant to be together. Our friends, Mark and Lena, stood by her side, knowing all along, and said nothing. I was a fool in their twisted play. When Troy smirked, suggesting I move out, I knew then. This betrayal wouldn't go unanswered. I'd lost everything, but they'd soon regret underestimating me. There are days when life feels really tough, and you just want to yell at everyone around you. You know those days. You wake up realizing you're late because you kept hitting the snooze button. You hurry out the door, and the rest of the day seems like a climb uphill. That's how my day started, and it only got worse as it went on. Jillian and I had been married for almost 5 years. We met through friends at a barbecue and hit it off right away. From what I gathered, Jillian had just ended a long relationship, and her friends thought I could be a good guy for her. At first, I was cautious. I didn't want to be her rebound. But over a few months, our friends kept introducing us, and we built a friendship. After 6 months, I finally got the courage to ask her out, and a little over 2 years later, I asked Jillian to marry me. I was so happy when she said yes. Until tonight, I would have done anything for her because I loved her so much. "Greg?" Jillian asked while I was polishing my shoes for our night out. "Should I wear the black or the beige heels?" That's me, Gregory Other, an average guy and a hard-working accountant with my own practice. Right now, I felt foolish. "You look good in both," I replied, "but the black heels really show off your legs. They'll get a lot of attention." Jillian loved to dress up, and when she put in the effort, she looked great. But sometimes her fashion choices were off. She had trouble mixing colors and styles. I loved that she asked for my opinion, and I enjoyed helping her look her best. Besides starting the day late, work had been tough. We were doing audits for a large company, and there were many delays and mistakes. While most were innocent errors, some of the recent reports we reviewed seemed unusual. My team and I spent the day sorting through numbers and accounts. It was frustrating dealing with some odd things that managers were trying to approve, including unnecessary expenses. By the end of this hectic Friday, I felt exhausted. To make things harder, Jillian had been cheerful all week, excited about our reunion tonight. I felt annoyed that she didn't seem to notice how tired I was. In the past, if I had a tough week like this one, Jillian would have taken the time to listen to me and cheer me up. But this week, she was so focused on the reunion that I felt like I was bothering her, which was new for us. I didn't like that feeling, but she was my wife, and if she was happy about something, I tried to share in that joy, even if I felt down. Tonight was her high school reunion. It wasn't an official event, just something planned by a few classmates. They got a restaurant and later rented a private area at a club for everyone to catch up. I went with Jillian last year and got some curious looks when I was introduced as her husband, but I enjoyed myself. This year I wasn't feeling too excited about it. Like I said, it had been a tough week. Still, with Jillian's excitement and hoping it could help me forget my busy week, I got ready without complaining. I showered, shaved, put on my best suit, fixed my hair, and tried to be the supportive partner she deserves. As soon as we got to the restaurant, I sensed something was off. Jillian was quickly pulled away by some of her classmates, leaving me standing alone. At dinner, we sat with our friends Lena and Mark, who introduced us, but I didn't join the conversation much. I mostly asked a few questions now and then. Jillian was acting cheerful, but I noticed she didn't talk to me much. Lena and Mark kept giving me looks that didn't feel very friendly. As dinner ended, Jillian and Lena went to the bathroom and took a long time coming back. Meanwhile, everyone else started heading to the club for drinks and some dancing. "What's happening, Mark?" I asked my friend, approaching him since Jillian and Lena hadn't returned. "Sorry, Greg," Mark said, surprised when I tapped his shoulder. "I'm not sure what you mean." I raised an eyebrow at him. "Really, Mark?" I paused as I saw Lena come back, but Jillian was still missing. Lena took her husband's hand and tried to steer clear of me. "Come on, Mark." "Lena, where's Jillian?" I asked, my worry growing. She hesitated for a moment, then exchanged a glance with Mark before looking around the restaurant, seemingly lost in thought. I could see she was struggling to find the right words to tell me something she didn't want to share. "I'm sorry, Gregory. We got caught up with a group and she's going to the club with them." "Without telling me her husband?" I asked, my voice filled with frustration. "Lena, Mark, what are you not telling me?" I pressed on. Neither of them could look at me, which annoyed me even more. Without another word, I stormed out of the restaurant, jumped into my car, and drove to the club. It should have taken 10 minutes, but I made it in 5. When I walked in, I was shocked to see my wife Jillian dancing with another man. He had his hands all over her, and the way she leaned into him told me this wasn't a one-time occurrence. I felt like my world was crumbling around me. People from the reunion were coming in, but they didn't say anything. I could feel their sympathetic looks as I stood by the entrance. I don't know how long I stood there, but they never noticed me. Then, I felt a hand on my shoulder, startling me. I turned quickly, almost bumping into Lena. "It's Jillian's first love, Troy," Lena said flatly. I couldn't tell what she was feeling. They pretty much grew up together, best friends from preschool through high school. We all thought they would end up together until he got a scholarship to a university in the States and they broke up. Now I knew who he was, and I remembered helping Jillian through the pain of that breakup. "They don't look very broken up to me," I muttered. "He's been back for a few months working with his company," Lena explained without much emotion. I looked back at the dance floor where Jillian and Troy were still dancing. Lena continued to speak as she watched them, while Mark stood quietly behind us. "They are meant to be together, Greg." For the first time, her voice held emotion, like a doctor delivering bad news. I didn't respond. Jillian was so heartbroken when they split. She loved him so much. We thought she would never find someone again, but then you came along. Lena tried to clarify, but my hands were tightening into fists as the song ended. Troy leaned in, touched Jillian's face, and kissed her. I felt the tension rise within me. As a drop of blood fell from my palm, it seemed to break the moment between them. Jillian looked around the club and locked eyes with me. She gently pulled away from Troy and started walking towards me. I didn't even notice Mark and Lena slipping away. She approached me as if everything was normal. "Troy was my first love, Greg." Jillian jumped right into conversation without a greeting. "We shared everything important. When he went for his scholarship, we promised we'd reconnect when he came back." I stood still, trying to process her words. "I guess he came back and you two got back together," I said with a hint of sarcasm. "Don't say that," Jillian replied with a scolding tone. "I know this is hard for you, but Troy and I are meant to be together." I couldn't believe what I heard. Jillian Bronwyn. "Other, you married me!" I exclaimed, my voice rising. She held my gaze without flinching. "I'm sorry, Greg. We need to get a divorce. Troy and I plan to get married and have a family." "Was I just your backup for all those years?" I raised my voice, noticing a few onlookers watching us closely. I recognized Troy approaching us, and he seemed ready for confrontation. "Are you Greg?" he asked, feigning concern. "That's Gregory to you," I shot back, filled with anger. "I understand you're upset," he said. "You're angry because I'm with Jillian, and we've been close since I got back." Jillian's face turned pale, and I could see she was worried about his words. Troy, not realizing how his comment affected us, stepped in front of her defensively. "Listen, Gregory," he said, trying to soften his tone. "I'm sorry you found out this way, but maybe it's for the best. Jillian tells me you've been a good husband. Maybe we can all be friends since we share mutual friends." "Not for long," I said, narrowing my gaze at Jillian before turning back to Troy. He opened his mouth to respond, but I jumped in first. "So you both think this is true love? Have your fun during school and then break apart because Troy moved away?" I noticed that the music had stopped, and everyone in the room was watching us closely, even the DJ. While Jillian was dealing with her sadness, she met me. We fell in love and got married, enjoying several happy years together. Everyone listened carefully, and you could hear a pin drop. Then, things changed when Romeo returned to town. He and Jillian started seeing each other again while hiding it from me. It was clear that our friends knew what was happening, judging by their looks all night. It all led to this moment where my supposed best friend hurt me in a very public way. "Greg, it wasn't supposed to be," Jillian began. "What was it supposed to be?" I shouted back. No one moved. "All week you have been acting strange, ignoring me. Even when I had a tough week, you insisted we come here together and then left me the moment we arrived. You showed me no respect in front of our friends, leaving the restaurant without a word. I come in here to find you with him." "Hey!" Troy tried to speak, but I gave him a fierce look. "Don't say a word, Romeo," I said. "It's clear that Jillian has not been faithful. You claim you two have been close for 3 months. That's not real love." "Look, Greg," Troy replied, trying to calm the situation. "I know emotions are running high, but Jillian and I believe we're meant to be together. We regret that you're hurt over this, but Jillian loves me and we're planning to marry. You both will need to part ways." "Naturally," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Greg," Jillian spoke softly, "I'm really sorry. We thought this would be the quickest way to handle it. We know it will hurt, but it's better for everyone involved." She paused, trying to gauge how I felt. We had been close friends and partners for years, and I had always been open with her. "Jillian, please call me Gregory," I said, and she visibly tensed. Gregory, she corrected. "I understand this is painful right now, but it's for the best. You're still young. You'll find someone new." I felt a flash of anger, and it seemed to affect her. The room was silent. Troy seemed to notice and tried to speak again. Gregory, I know this is a lot to handle, but maybe it's best for you to leave. Everyone here knows that Jillian and I belong together. You'd only feel out of place." I smiled slightly, and half the room looked at me in surprise. "On that point, we agree." He smiled back, thinking maybe I was starting to understand. "Now that everything is clear, Jillian and I will stay away from your place this weekend and even next week so you can move out," Troy said. "Move out?" I asked, tilting my head in surprise. Troy swallowed hard. "Well, it's Jillian's house too." "I understand," I replied, narrowing my eyes. "Gregory," my soon-to-be ex-wife said, struggling a bit with saying my full name. "We thought it would be easier for you to move out. The house is perfect for Troy and me to start a family, and we think it's too big for you on your own, so we can figure something out." "I see," I repeated, my tone sounding sharp. For a moment, nobody spoke, and the quiet lingered until the DJ decided to start the music, hoping to break the tension. As the music played, no one danced. Everyone was still watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Troy raised his voice over the music. "I'm sorry, Gregory, but that's just how it is. I know you might not agree now, but I hope there are no hard feelings." He offered his hand. I glanced at his hand, then back at him. His hand quickly pulled back when he saw my face. If he could have read my thoughts, he would have felt the anger boiling inside me. Realizing it was time to leave, I turned and walked out. The 2 bouncers at the door stepped aside to let me pass. As the door closed behind me, the noise inside faded. "You good, man?" one of the bouncers asked, having seen what just happened. "No, not really, but I guess anyone would feel this way after what just happened," I said, trailing off. "You know," the other bouncer said, "if you wanted to go back in and give him a piece of your mind, we could wait a bit before stepping in." For the first time that day, I chuckled. Both bouncers smiled back. "While that's tempting, I think he'll pass on a night in the holding area." They nodded in agreement. "Still," the first bouncer said, "I've seen a lot working in clubs, but that was one of the coldest ways to end a marriage I've ever witnessed. I'm sorry for what you're going through." I waved off the sympathy. "Don't worry about it. I think I'll just go home," I replied. "And change the locks, man. Don't let her back in until you have to," the second bouncer added. I raised an eyebrow and smiled. We chatted for a minute before I shook their hands and headed to my car. On the way home, I stopped by a hardware store. It was late, but they were still open for about an hour. I quickly grabbed what I needed: new locks, deadbolts, a few moving boxes, and some packing tape. When I got home, I began changing the locks and putting together the boxes. A few hours later, I had piled up several boxes with Jillian's things. I felt overwhelmed by the shock of being completely abandoned by my wife and friends. so I had to sit down. I poured myself a drink, then turned on my laptop. I checked our bank account and began to do what many people do when they feel betrayed. I blocked and canceled our joint credit cards. Then I opened a new account and moved half of our savings and vacation funds into it. It would take a few days to process, but I had some cash on hand so I could manage. After finishing my drink, I felt a boost of energy and opened our legal folder. Inside, I found important documents like the papers for our house, our investment properties, and the prenuptial agreement we signed when we got married. I know what you're thinking. There's an infidelity clause in it. But that's not the case here. The prenuptial was mostly meant to protect my business assets. When we started dating and got married, I had just begun my accounting firm. I was lucky to have some good mentors who advised me to keep my business in my name alone, and Jillian and I both agreed that my business and its branches would not be part of any separation. Looking back, I realized Jillian likely agreed to this easily, because she already had plans to betray me. She had no idea how much this would end up costing her. That night, I had a restless sleep, but managed to get a few hours before I decided to treat myself to breakfast. I drove around until I found a great Asian fusion restaurant that served delicious breakfast meals mixing traditional Asian and Australian flavors. While I enjoyed my meal and a strong coffee, I started writing a letter to a friend at a law firm my company works with, explaining what was happening and preparing for a divorce. I received a call from Mike within half an hour. He was in disbelief, but I filled him in on everything. He said he'd be ready to file on Monday morning and would refer me to someone in his firm who could help. He also expressed how sorry he was for my situation. I spent another hour at the cafe, browsing the web on my laptop and feeling a bit sorry for myself. When I returned home, I saw Mark and Lena parked in the driveway as I pulled up to the curb. "Greg, Lena began. I raised my hand to pause her before she could continue, and she stopped. "Gregory," I said. "Sorry?" Lena asked. "My name is Gregory." "Only my friends get to call me Greg," I said firmly. "Listen, buddy," Mark began, trying to sound friendly. "We're sorry about how last night went. That's not how—" I raised my hand to stop him, and he quieted down, just like his wife. I glanced at a tree across the street. It was a big tree that had lost a branch in a recent storm. The branch had fallen onto a carport but missed the house. As I looked at it, I thought about how losing that branch was like what I felt inside. Losing Jillian felt like losing a part of myself. When I turned back to Mark and Lena a minute later, tears were streaming down my face, and I was filled with anger. "Don't you dare, Mark! Don't you even try to make excuses!" I shouted. "You've known she was with someone else for months, and you said nothing." "But Gregory, it's true." Lena started. "Love!" I interrupted, wiping away my tears. "I don't want to hear your justifications. True love doesn't hurt others to get what it wants. True love is kind. It cares about the feelings of those around it instead of abandoning them or humiliating them without warning. I thought Jillian and I had true love. I never doubted her. I cared for her deeply and would have given her anything." "I know," Lena said, her eyes filling with tears. "But Jillian and Troy—" "Stop!" I yelled, my anger boiling over in that one word. The tears dried up. "Stop," I said softly. "Lena, I don't want to hear anything more about Jillian and Troy. I don't want to hear about their love. I just wasted the last several years of my life in a lie. 7 years, Lena. 7 years supporting her when she felt lost. Years of encouraging her to be her best self, facing challenges together, and dreaming about a future as a family. I see now that I was never the first choice. But tell me this, friend." I emphasized the word. "Why does he get to come back after leaving her when I was the one who really cared?" They looked at me as if I was a child who didn't understand. I continued, my pain spilling out. "He takes everything I worked for. He takes the woman I helped when he abandoned her. He gets the friends who turned their backs on me before she found true love." At least they looked a bit ashamed at that last part. "Well, that's not right," I said to them. "She gets what she deserves, and you both helped with that, so please leave my property." "Greg," Mark said. I glared at him. "I know this isn't how we thought things would turn out. We really believed Jillian and you would be happy forever and have kids. But then Troy came back, and it's clear they care for each other. I know it's hard, but they deserve to be happy." "And what about my happiness?" I asked. "What do I deserve?" They didn't know how to respond. I let out a deep breath. He'll tell you what I deserve. I deserve a faithful partner and friends who care about me, but I have none of that, so forget your sympathy. It seems none of you, including her, care about me if it conflicts with them. If I seem bitter, it's because I am. But just try to understand how I feel, I said. I looked at Lena. Mark? When Lena finds her true love and leaves you for him, then you'll know how I feel. But Mark is my... Lena started, but Mark held her arm to stop her. Fine, Gregory, Mark said. You've made your point, and you're not willing to see it from a different angle. We're leaving, but can we do anything for you as a parting gesture? I thought for a moment and glanced at their van parked in the driveway. Yes, wait here. In the next few minutes, I brought out several boxes filled with Jillian's clothes and personal items. I placed them in front of them, and a couple of things broke inside. I saw them wince, but they stayed quiet. I thought about leaving these in the driveway, but since you're here, you can take them to her new place, I said. But Jillian said she wanted the house, and you were going to move. Lena started. I laughed, cutting her off. It's not her house. It doesn't belong to her, and it doesn't belong to me either. So she's going to find she's out of luck. Tell her she doesn't need to come back here. Everything that's hers is in those boxes. Also, let her know she'll get divorce papers from my lawyer on Monday. I've already taken out all her things and removed myself from the account, so whatever is left is hers. You're not even... Lena began, then stopped. What? I asked. To fight? No way. She's with him. She's lied to me for years about her loyalty. No, he'll give her what she deserves, nothing more, nothing less. There wasn't much left to say, so I watched them load the boxes into their van and drive away. I think they felt sad. They knew that by supporting Jillian, they had lost my friendship, but if they felt bad about it, I couldn't see it. That night, I drank too much and cried. I got very upset and punched a hole in the wall. After that, I broke a vase that Jillian and I had bought on our first wedding anniversary. I was filled with anger about being left by my wife and friends, and I made a mess in the lounge room. If something was loose, I threw it. If it was secured, I used whatever I could find to break it. I damaged the walls in the hallway and pulled the doors off the kitchen cabinets, even leaving some dents on the fridge. The next morning, I woke up feeling awful. My head hurt badly and my hands were bruised. I probably hurt my hands and had cuts on my arms. I quickly wrapped bandages around my wounds, knowing I should see a doctor to get checked out. Looking around the lounge room, I realized I would have to replace almost everything since nothing had escaped the damage. The hallway had holes where I had vented my frustration on the walls. In the kitchen, cupboard doors were all over the floor, and the appliances were in strange positions that made them unusable. I felt a pang as I noticed the dents in the fridge, remembering that breaking the metal door had felt like an escape back then. I found some orange juice in the fridge that was still good, so I took a couple of pain relievers and drank it down. After a while, my headache began to ease, and I moved into the lounge room. I sat on the floor among the broken furniture and stared at the cracked TV. The rest of my day went by in a fog. I went to the doctor, who checked my arms. Both of my hands had small fractures, and I needed to keep them wrapped for a while to heal. I received messages from a few people, including Mark and Lena, but I didn't reply. That night, I went to bed without remembering much of anything I had done other than looking at the TV and visiting the doctor. The next day was Monday, and I went to the office at my usual time. My routine started with checking emails from Friday and anything that had come in over the weekend, followed by getting ready for a 9 a.m. team meeting where we would plan our tasks for the week. I had a team of 15 people, and for the most part, we did good work. Around 8:30, my office admin, Colleen, who was in her 50s, came in. She took one look at me, pulled out a chair, and sat down. "Did you have a rough weekend?" she asked, noticing the bandages on my hands and arms. I had always been kind to her during the 3 years we worked together, so when I glared at her, she looked nervous. "Gregory, I'm sorry. It must have been really bad." "What happened?" she asked gently. I sighed and stared at my computer screen for a moment before turning to face her. "Jillian left me for someone else," I said in a flat voice. "What?" Colleen exclaimed. "No, you can't be serious, Gregory." I held up my bandaged hands and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I shook my head. It's true, I told her. On Friday night, we had a reunion. It felt like everyone knew what was going to happen, including Mark and Lena. They all knew that Jillian and someone else had been seeing each other behind my back for months. They chose to tell me that night. At that moment, I broke down and cried. For the first time, Colleen came around my desk and gave me a hug. I could feel her own tears falling onto my shoulders. I explained how I got drunk on Saturday, filled with anger, and damaged most of the furniture in my house, leaving marks on the walls. I also told her that I had gone to the doctor the day before to get my hands wrapped, all while dealing with a terrible hangover. By the time our morning meeting arrived, both of us had tried our best to dry our eyes. Colleen gathered everyone in our big meeting room on time. Once everyone was seated, I walked in and sat down. I hope everyone had a good weekend, I said, and while many nodded, they tried not to look at my bandages. This week? I started to say, but Colleen interrupted, raising her hand to pause the meeting. Sorry, Gregory, but I can't let this go. After what you went through this weekend, we can't pretend everything is okay, Colleen said. I paused for a moment and then nodded. Colleen looked at me, and her expression showed she wanted to share at least the basics with the group. After thinking for a moment, I nodded, knowing she would share what would help. Everyone, Colleen started. This past weekend, Gregory faced a big betrayal from his wife and some friends. Jillian has been unfaithful to him for the last few months and chose to leave him in a very hurtful way. By embarrassing him in front of a group of people, some of whom were supposed to be friends. Colleen paused for a moment to let that sink in. Then she turned her attention to one person sitting quietly on the other side of the table. Isn't that right, James? Colleen asked. James Colson was one of our accountants and also a classmate of Jillian. I realized for the first time that both he and his wife had been there on Friday night, watching everything happen. James had kept to himself since coming into the office, trying to stay out of sight. But when Colleen began to talk, he looked worried. When she called him out, he seemed to shrink in his seat as everyone turned to look at him. He started. James, Colleen said in a serious tone. Were you there on Friday night or not? Yes, but James tried to explain. And did you know that your boss' wife was involved with someone from your class? Colleen asked firmly. James seemed to choke on his words. Be honest, James. James glanced down at the table and said quietly, I did. For a moment, there was silence. You could feel the tension in the air. Until today, I would have believed everyone in the room was loyal to each other. Now many people were visibly upset with James. All right then, James, Colleen continued after a brief pause. I think you need to leave the room. You need to consider your future with this firm because if we find out you supported Jillian at all during this past weekend, you will lose your job. Do you understand? He nodded, looking serious, and stood up. I understand. He tried to leave the room quietly. No one spoke as he walked out. I had almost forgotten that James was there on Friday. During all the chaos, I had only focused on the main people involved in my troubles. I cleared my throat. Everyone, I said, trying to get us back on track. I won't lie. My personal life is difficult, and I know my weekend was tough. I raised my hands to make my point clear. But we all have work to do and clients to care for. This week I will trust that you all support each other. If you need anything specific, just let Colleen know. I will be here, but let's be real, I'm going to be a bit of a mess. So please be patient with me. I felt emotional again as the people around the room offered their understanding and words of encouragement. Lastly, I said, gathering my thoughts, this is hard for me to say, but please don't blame James just yet. I know you're all upset, and it's easy to point fingers at him, but let's take some time to learn the full story before making any decisions about him. I received a few nods, and everyone seemed to agree. Colleen took over for the rest of the meeting. After ending the meeting, I returned to my office and gazed out the window. A few moments later, Colleen knocked. I turned to see her standing there with a quiet James behind her. I invited them in, and James politely closed the door before taking the seat Colleen showed him. I think you and James need to talk, Gregory, she said straightforwardly. I agreed and sat down as James took a seat across from me. My mind was still racing with thoughts, and it was not even 10 in the morning. I could have really used a drink. James cleared his throat, catching my attention. When I looked at him, he seemed to avoid my gaze. So, I started, my tone reflecting the tension in the room. Gregory, He hesitated, then let out a small laugh. Is something funny? Colleen asked, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice. James smiled a sad smile. No, there's nothing amusing about this situation, he said. My boss feels betrayed. Our class is torn apart and I had my wife yelling at me all day yesterday. I might lose my job too. So no, nothing is funny, but I try to laugh to cope instead of crying. I managed a careful smile back. I had always liked James. He was dedicated, and until this morning I thought he had a secure place with us. James, why don't you start from the beginning? I suggested, trying to sound easygoing. He nodded and shifted awkwardly in his chair. I guess you've heard about how perfect Jillian and Troy were in high school, he asked. I nodded. I've heard nothing else but that lately, I replied. He nodded again. In high school, I was the math nerd. I wasn't bullied, but I also wasn't part of the popular crowd. Still, we all looked up to Jillian and Troy. They were the stars of our year. He paused, waiting for a reaction. When I didn't respond, he continued. As we approached graduation and university decisions were being made, everyone assumed they would go together. But we were all shocked when Troy said he was leaving for overseas, without Jillian. Another pause. I gestured for him to go on. They broke up the week before graduation. Troy went to some parties, but Jillian stayed back. During the break between graduation and university, I saw Jillian a couple of times. She looked lost and sad. Then months later, I heard that Troy was thriving in the States. He had a scholarship, and there were whispers that he already had a new girlfriend. I gave him an understanding nod. I remember hearing this from Jillian when I helped her stand during the early days of our relationship. A few times she cried on my shoulder about how much it hurt that Troy would leave her for someone else. After one of those talks, Jillian and I shared our first kiss, and I asked her out on a date. After that, Troy began to fade from her mind. That is, until recently. James brought me back to the present. Well, I went to university, got my degree, met and married Sherry, and felt lucky to get a job here. His smile had a hint of sadness. I was surprised to learn that you married Jillian, James said. Honestly, I was happy to see her so joyful with you. Troy leaving did hurt her a lot. It made me glad to see that she found someone good to help her move on. For a moment, James seemed lost in thought, so I decided to ask a question. When did you find out about Troy and Jillian? I asked, surprised that my voice sounded calm. James appeared surprised too, since I didn't sound angry. About an hour before you and Jillian came for dinner. He sounded upset. Some classmates were talking. I heard something about Jillian leaving you for Troy later, and everyone looked shocked. I raised an eyebrow at James. He sighed. Before dinner, only a few people knew anything. But then everyone started saying that Jillian and Troy were meant to be together. Mark and Lena pulled Sherry and me aside and said it was happening. They felt sorry for you, but said Jillian had made her choice, and you weren't in her future anymore. I wanted to speak up, but then Mark reminded me I worked for you. He told me clearly that if I said anything to you, I would regret it. He insisted it was best for Sherry and me to leave if I couldn't keep quiet. I looked at James. He clearly felt bad remembering that conversation. I noticed a blush creeping up his neck, and his eyes looked a bit wet. I'm sorry, Gregory. We couldn't stay for dinner. Sherry wanted to be there for you, but Mark and some others basically made us leave and told us to stay away. James, I began, wanting to comfort him. He raised his hand to stop me. Sorry, Gregory. I need to finish this. I promised Sherry. I nodded for him to continue. I was shocked, he continued. I had just been thrown out of my class reunion because your wife was about to leave you, and I was caught in the middle. We were upset and didn't know what to do, so Sherry and I went straight to the club. We both agreed we wanted to support you. What happened then? I asked, tilting my head slightly. I didn't notice you there. We were here, but by the time you showed up, we were in the back. Some guys in front of us kept us from reaching you until Jillian let you know we were here. When you left, they let us go after a little while. Sherry and I hurried after you, but by the time we got outside, you were already gone. I think we waited outside the club for about 30 minutes, feeling confused and unsure of what to do. Finally, Sherry convinced me we should go back in and see what was going on. James paused, glancing at me as if deciding how much more to share. I nodded for him to continue, and he swallowed. When Sherry and I returned, we didn't feel welcome to most of our classmates. The rest of them were upset, and when they realized I worked for you, they surrounded us and didn't let anyone come close for the rest of the night. And I started but couldn't finish my thought. They danced and drank like nothing was wrong, James said, swallowing again, clearly nervous. I'm sorry, Gregory, but they acted like you didn't matter. We heard that this had been planned for months. It was even harder to hear that Jillian and Troy are thinking about getting married soon. James stared at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap. That night at home, we didn't sleep well. Sherry and I ended up arguing about everything, even though we both felt disgusted by Jillian and Troy's actions. This brings us to today, James said as he pulled a piece of paper from his notebook and set it on the table in front of me. What's this? I asked, quickly reading the words. My resignation, he said, looking defeated. I noticed it was signed and dated yesterday. James, I began. No, Gregory, he interrupted. What they did to you was wrong. I couldn't help you even though you've been a great boss and a friend. You deserve better. Sherry and I agreed it's best for me to resign so you won't have to think about what happened on Friday night every time you see me. For a moment, we were silent. I looked at his resignation and let out a small laugh, more like a bark. But for the first time, I felt something other than sadness and anger. Colleen and James looked at me, surprised. I grabbed the paper by the middle and tore it in half. Your resignation is not accepted, I said. I caught Colleen smiling behind me. James looked stunned. But Gregory, what? Why? He stammered. James, first of all, my friends call me Greg. After what you just shared, I hope you can see me as a friend too. You tried to help me, but they were ready for you. You're here now, choosing to step back because you care. If that's not a friend, nothing is. James, I feel really hurt, I said. I am feeling sad and angry inside. I need some fairness in this situation. But I see that you are upset too. James nodded. Sherry and I thought this was for the best. I understand, I replied. That's why I want Sherry and you to stay with us. For the next half hour, we talked. In the end, Colleen, James, and I left my office and called everyone back into the meeting room. I shared how James felt blindsided like I did, and how he was pushed out of his own reunion because of two dishonest people. As I explained everything, any hard feelings towards James went away. By the time we finished, some people even had sly smiles on their faces. For the rest of the week, I spent most of my time at the office. Besides advising my staff, I focused on starting the process for my divorce. Instead of mailing the divorce papers, I had Jillian served at work. In Australia, adultery does not affect divorce, but I made sure my lawyers, Mike and Sally, included a note about it in the legal documents. After Jillian received the papers, I got a few calls and texts from her. I didn't delete them, but chose to ignore them. I figured they would be angry messages, so I let them pile up on my phone. I kept busy managing my bank accounts, listing my assets, checking canceled cards, and dealing with insurance. My team ensured that my legal documents were all in order and that Jillian couldn't access anything. Colleen came over on Tuesday evening with a meal. She gasped when she saw the mess in my house. The tears she shed while walking from room to room could have left a trail. On Wednesday morning, Colleen contacted my insurance agency to set up a damage assessment. I'm not sure how she did it, but by Friday, she arranged for assessors and cleaning crews to come to my house. Everything was set to start the following week. By Friday night, I felt worn out, both in body and mind. I still wasn't sleeping well, so on Saturday morning, with no work to do, I got up early and went for a run. I ended up jogging down to the local shops and sitting at a cafe where I enjoyed coffee and a croissant before jogging home a couple of hours later. When I got back to the house, I was surprised to find Jillian sitting on the front steps waiting for me. I hadn't seen her since that Friday when she left. She was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a casual blouse, but the outfit didn't quite match. It seemed that the guy she liked didn't help her look her best. I paused halfway up the driveway, a light sweat covering my body as I took out my earphones. The loud music from Anti-Sleep by Blue Stolly stopped when I pressed pause. If you need music to channel your anger, check it out. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Greg, it's good to see you, Jillian began. I suddenly spat on the grass, interrupting her. What? I shot back. Are you surprised I'm taking care of myself after my wife betrayed me in front of everyone? Did you think I would be so upset that I might lose control and harm myself? You really think I would be lying around unable to cope? I glared at her, and Jillian had the sense to take a small step back and look a bit pale. It wasn't like that, Greg. I never meant to. Hurt me! I almost shouted at her, cutting off her excuses. For a moment she stood silent, then nodded. Like I can believe that, Jillian. You made it clear you were leaving me while people I thought were friends were there. You chose to break my heart. She looked down. Greg, it wasn't my idea to do it this way, she said softly. Mark and Troy thought that if we did it in front of others, you wouldn't fight it. I laughed bitterly. You must be joking, I said as I calmed down. We've known each other for years. We were about to be married for 5 years. You thought I wouldn't care when I found out you were unfaithful, or that you were leaving me? Jillian's face turned red. But, no buts, I replied sharply. You lost any right to my care the moment you made that choice. It took me time to find out, but now I know the truth. You can leave now. Greg, that's not fair. I'm still your wife, Jillian said, a hint of anger in her voice. Ha! I scoffed, then started walking up the drive toward the front door. I pulled out my keys and unlocked it. As I stepped inside, she tried to come in too, but I raised my hand to stop her. You can't come in, I said firmly. But Greg, it's still my house too, she protested. I shook my head. No, it's not. It never was. The house belongs to the trust and my paycheck covers the rent every month. She looked at me, confused. Look, Jillian, this isn't your home anymore. You don't live here. But wait, I have a few things to give you. I closed the door behind her. As I entered my study, I quickly texted my lawyer to let her know Jillian was here. I picked up a few items and returned to the front door. Jillian was still standing there. Greg, she began, but I raised my hand to signal her to stop. First of all, it's Gregory. I told you, only my friends call me Greg, and you are definitely not a friend. Jillian swallowed hard. Second, I said, handing her a small binder, this has a check for your share of our assets. Her eyes widened. The check in her hand conveyed more than any divorce papers that we were finished. Third, I hear you have something for me? She hesitated for a moment, then opened her handbag, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to me. I'm sorry, Gregory. You will be, I replied mysteriously. I opened the envelope with her standing there and flipped through the first few pages. I snorted and looked up at her. Jillian flushed, knowing I was reacting to her request for 75% of our savings and half of my business in response to my divorce notice. I flipped to the back and found another document, a restraining order that would start on Monday, keeping me away from her and from being near my own house. Really? I said, raising my eyebrows. In that moment, she couldn't meet my gaze. She realized that things had gone too far. To be honest, Jillian had always gone along with what others decided. Now the consequences would hit her harder than she expected. I pulled out my phone and called my divorce lawyer. I kept looking at Jillian as she shuffled her feet. Sally, my lawyer's associate, answered on the second ring. Hi, Sally, I have Jillian here in front of my house. Along with her demands from the divorce petition, she gave me a restraining order that keeps me away from her and the house, which she doesn't even live in anymore. As I listened to Sally's strong reactions, I noticed Jillian turning a few shades of red, clearly hearing the frustration in my voice. So, I said, hanging up and turning to Jillian, how does it feel to be one of the most terrible people around, Jillian? For a brief moment, she was silent. It's not like that, Greg. Ori, Jillian eventually said softly. I got Troy to agree to give you until Monday to move out so we could take over. I laughed. You can't just move in. It's not your house, I said again, clearly stating the fact. But you can't be here, she answered, sounding a bit like a child who wasn't getting her way. I shrugged. Maybe that's true, and trust me, this mess will backfire. But just because I can't stay here doesn't mean you and your partner can. I think it's time for you to leave, Jillian. I wish you well, but I'd be lying. You really dislike me that much? She asked, glancing at my bandaged hands without voicing her thoughts. You actually have the nerve to ask that after what you did and now this paperwork? I replied, feeling frustrated. At this moment, I wondered if she understood anything. She stayed silent. Jillian, you meant everything to me. You were my best friend. I trusted you more than anyone else. Then one day, you took all that away and treated me like I didn't matter at all. You've become someone I no longer recognize. So tell me, at what point did you think I wouldn't change my feelings towards you after all this? I crossed my bandaged arms. Her eyes widened at my harsh words. She had never heard me speak like that to her before. For a moment, she fidgeted with her hands and looked up at me. I hoped, she started, taking a breath. Gregory, you're right. We had some good years, but the restraining order is just until the divorce is finalized. Mark, Lena, Troy, and I are hoping we could be friends again once everything settles down. I couldn't believe what I heard. Friends! I exclaimed, my arms dropping the envelope in frustration. You must be joking. If any of you were in trouble, I wouldn't lift a finger to help. Friends. You are living in a fantasy, I added, noticing movement behind her. Mark and Lena were coming up the driveway, and I could see the other person waiting by the curb. It seemed they had come from a big truck just as I lost my temper at Jillian. Oh, look, our so-called friends are here now, I said, glaring at them. Greg, Mark said, stepping up behind Jillian. Calm down, you don't need to. Leave me alone, I shot back. We are not friends, and we won't be friendly anymore. Your betrayal is almost as hurtful as the others, so don't think you can say anything that will change the situation. I glared at the couple who set Jillian and me up, and then helped ruin our relationship. Both of you share the blame as much as she does and the person over there, I said, pointing at the one who took my wife but didn't have the courage to stand up for her. Greg, Lena said, trying to sound firm. My anger shifted to her. Don't you dare, Lena. You have no right to talk down to me. You helped my wife cheat on me. Both of you did, I said, now pointing at Lena and Mark. You planned that embarrassing moment at the club to hurt me. They stood silent, and I could see Lena starting to speak, but I interrupted. And don't give me any nonsense about true love. You tried that before. Remember, both of you introduced her to me and encouraged me to marry her. Then, without a second thought, you both betrayed me. If this is your idea of love, then this world is in serious trouble. They looked shocked at the anger in my voice. I paused, and an idea came to me. Lena, do you forgive Mark when he comes home smelling like someone else after being out all night? I asked, smiling with a hint of mockery. Lena's eyes widened as she looked at Mark. Baby, that's not true. Mark started, but I laughed, making them all stare. Actually, it sounds familiar. Mark would tell the guys his little tales. It's like he thinks only part of the club is for that, but if you pay extra, you can get a private dance. And well, those extras add up. I relished their discomfort, watching as Mark stepped back, then he bolted down the road with his wife chasing after him, yelling. I turned to Troy, who looked speechless, then back at Jillian, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Greg, she said my name. I mean Gregory, you didn't need to do that, she stated. I rolled my eyes and leaned in closer. Oh, don't worry, Jillian. This is just the beginning. Mark has many more secrets. My anger won't only go towards them. There are others who will feel my wrath. I smiled at her, noticing how she seemed uneasy at my words. What? What do you mean? Jillian asked. Just leave now, Jillian, I said, switching the subject and not answering her question. Tell Troy to take you away. Get out of this country if you can, because if you stay, neither of you will like what's coming. Greg, what's wrong? Where is the man I love? She asked, not realizing the weight of her words until it was too late. He's gone, I replied flatly. You took my heart and soul, and what's left is something dark, something that will take pleasure in what's about to happen. Jillian was quiet. I took a step back and shut the door with a loud bang, laughing in a way that reminded me of the villains in movies. I looked outside 10 minutes later, and Jillian, along with Troy and the truck, were gone. I sat down on the floor, my body trembling from the confrontation, and I broke down again. I loved her, but I felt anger towards her too. I wanted to see her regret what she did. As I cried for what we used to have, I still wished she would return and ask for forgiveness, using all the familiar lines to win me back. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't happen. Even if it did, I could never trust her affection again. The following month was filled with the usual tasks, lawyers, financial statements, and deciding who would get what in the divorce. At work, my team supported me. Colleen helped me find a therapist. I met with him twice a week to talk about my feelings. I moved into a short-term apartment. It was for the best, as I couldn't stay in the house. Colleen organized the cleanup crews and builders to remove the broken furniture and appliances and to repair everything. Despite saying she wanted a quick resolution, Jillian fought over many things. First, there were our bank accounts. We had $20,000 total in 3 accounts, and Jillian claimed that over $15,000 was hers. Then there was the house and some investment properties. I had already owned our home before we got married, having taken a big loan for my business. As the years went on, paying back that loan and investing in 2 more properties turned out to be smart choices. Jillian helped with some improvements, but all 3 houses were in a trust where neither of us could directly benefit. She tried to fight for them with the lawyers I guessed she was paying with help from her new partner, but it was pointless. Those properties were out of her reach, and I felt a small sense of pride that she wouldn't see any return on those investments. Next came the furniture and jewelry. I had my lawyer note that all of her things were packed in boxes and sent to her. I made a list that included shoes, earrings, and necklaces from the boxes I packed for her. My last thought was about Jillian. She claimed she deserved half of my business because we had been together right after I started it. Sally clearly explained the rules of the prenup and even took a moment to tell Jillian that she wasn't entitled to anything from other accounting. In the end, Jillian received $10,000, which I suspect she mostly spent on lawyers. I wasn't happy, but it felt good knowing she ended up with so little while I kept my houses and my business, which were worth much more. Sally made it even better by somehow getting Jillian to return her wedding and engagement rings. The restraining order was lifted since Jillian had no right to the house. She couldn't get in anyway because the locks were changed, and I had a security company checking the house a few times a week before I moved back in. With everything settled, we had a couple of months to wait for the divorce to be final. I didn't hear much from Jillian. However, James and Sherry received many questions from people from the reunion who were still in touch with them, and they both strongly asked everyone to stop asking. James discovered that Jillian and her new partner were living in an apartment in town that was provided by his workplace. It was a 6-month lease, after which she would either have to pay for it herself or find a new place. Putting 2 and 2 together, it seemed she thought that getting with him would mean she had a ready-made home. Too bad for her. The next surprise came in August, just a couple of weeks before the divorce was finalized, and tax season was in full swing here in Australia. There are a few busy times for accountants during the year. For small businesses, August and September are the peak months as they try to get their taxes completed and refunds handled quickly. We didn't do much small business tax work, but over the years we had helped out some friends. I was surprised when one of those businesses showed up on Tuesday morning. I never expected to see them. "Gregory, come on, man. You've got to help me out," Mark was saying, looking worried as he sat across from me at one of our meeting tables. Lena was beside him, looking down. Just one glance told me that their relationship was in trouble, likely from our last meeting. "Why?" I asked, enjoying their discomfort. Next to me was James. For the past few years, both he and I had helped with the taxes for Mark's import-export business. It was a tricky situation to make sure everything was done correctly with the paperwork and financial details. We received good payment for our efforts. Mark could leave for another place, but it would cost him more and take time for a new company to understand his needs. "Really? Are you going to make me plead, Gregory?" Mark said with a hint of desperation in his voice. I chuckled, and James smiled too. "Pleading might add something to this, but I wonder why you are here. You all wanted to make things harder for me. You made excuses and didn't care about my feelings while you showered Jillian and that guy with compliments, telling me to move on. Well, I have moved on, and I want nothing to do with any of you. Can you accept that choice?" Silence hung in the air for a moment. "You were right, you know. Lena finally said softly when no one replied. I raised my eyebrow, curious. What do you mean? I asked. For a second, Lena looked at Mark, her expression changing. I was surprised by the anger there, but it quickly faded into sadness. Mark looked down at his hands, quiet. About the club and what happened in that back room, you were right, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. I couldn't hide my surprise. When Mark bragged about it, I thought he was just exaggerating. I had shared that story to hurt them, not believing it was real. Wow, really? So, Mark, you were telling the truth? I asked, still in disbelief. He glanced at me, then quickly looked down and nodded. I turned to Lena, raising my eyebrow again. You were right, Gregory, and not just about Mark, she told James and me while Mark remained quiet. We got so lost in the romance that Troy and Jillian presented that we forgot about you. I started to reply, but Lena shook her head. For once, I kept quiet. That day when you told us about Mark, I thought you were trying to upset us at first, but then I saw the look in his eyes and I knew you were sincere. But you didn't know it was true, did you? Lena asked. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. Figures. She paused, looking at me with sadness in her eyes, directed at me this time. We all knew it would hurt you, Gregory. When he returned and others talked about it, we all realized it was wrong but got lost in the idea of it being true love, convincing ourselves it was fine. Some of the loudest voices, like my husband, she said with a mix of regret, were just trying to ease their own guilt by saying you were fine to cover up their own mistakes. I looked at the troubled couple. Mark couldn't look any of us in the eyes, and Lena was close to breaking down. And now? I asked simply. Lena let out a bitter laugh. Now let's just say our choices have come back to haunt us. We hurt someone we cared about, and my marriage is hanging by a thread. I'm not sure it will last. I turned to Mark, who said nothing. I knew he was listening, but he couldn't lift his head. If they thought I would feel sorry for them, they were wrong. I can't say I'm unhappy to see you both struggling, I said gently. But I have to make a decision as the managing partner of Other Accounting. It's not in the best interest of the business to keep working with you. I watched Mark's shoulders drop. However, I continued. Mark looked up at me with a glimmer of hope. I can show a bit of mercy. Even if you don't deserve it, I can recommend 3 companies that may take on your account. James has their details. James slid a piece of paper across the table. If you're interested, just let James know, and we can pass your previous year's financials to any of them. The hope in Mark's eyes quickly faded to a blank stare. That's it? Mark asked. Just a recommendation? You're really done with us? Yes, I replied, shrugging. You chose to harm my marriage by supporting Jillian and her partner, using words like true love with no regret. You even laughed while doing it. This is cause and effect. You interfere with my life, and I have to do the same with yours. With that, I got up and left the room without saying goodbye. A little later, James told me they had picked another firm, and he would share the details in a couple of days once Mark and Lena signed the necessary papers. Over the next month, I had to repeat the same conversation with 3 more clients who had also supported Jillian. They realized I would no longer work with them. Surprisingly, although I lost 4 clients, I gained 6 new ones. Other classmates who disagreed with what happened wanted to help me by bringing in work. Other Accounting didn't really need the work, but I accepted it. August turned into September, and my divorce papers finally came through. By this time, I had moved back into the renovated house. My arms were fully healed and no longer itchy. I missed looking tough, but I wouldn't miss the irritation of the bandages. The day I got the paperwork, I also missed a call from Jillian that I didn't return, along with a text that I read. It simply said, "Goodbye, Gregory. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure how to feel." Did she regret what she had done? The hurt of betrayal had lessened a bit in the months since the incident at the club. I was still angry and sad, but I was able to think clearly. If Jillian could leave so easily, then she wasn't the right person for me. That weekend, Colleen and some of my coworkers surprised me with a barbecue at my place. I was taken aback, but ended up hugging many people throughout the day. I only got to chat with a fraction of the guests. All afternoon, I was surrounded by people. Colleen, James, Sherry, and others from work were there with me. At one point, I sat with a drink while James cooked on the barbecue. Sherry was next to me, and I felt very emotional watching kids play a game in my backyard. I realized that Jillian and I would not have the family we had talked about for years, and that hit me hard. Then I felt a light kiss on my cheek and turned to see Sherry sitting beside me. She took my hand and touched my cheek gently. "I understand, Greg, but there will be happiness again. Don't shut yourself off. Today you have many friends and family here to support you. What happened wasn't right. They hurt both James and me too, but we want you to know we are here for you." Sherry hugged me for a few minutes, and I could feel the tears coming. James then came over and put his hand on my shoulder, showing he cared. Colleen and several others hugged me too. I sensed that people were watching and supporting me, and while I felt pretty broken, I didn't feel any discomfort. The next week at work, I felt much better. My co-workers noticed I was smiling and even sharing a joke, which I hadn't done in a long time. During our weekly meeting, I thanked everyone for their support, mentioning James and Colleen, and giving a special thanks to Sherry for reminding me that life goes on after hardship. That week, we also gained 3 new clients, 2 of which were major companies. It seemed one of our past clients had recommended us. The companies needed in-depth financial analysis, and they chose us. We outlined our tasks, and for the first time since Jillian left, I decided to get involved in an audit for one of the companies. It was good work, and we had 3 months to get it done, so we got right to it. In the evenings, I settled into a routine of cooking dinner and staying active. I knew I could either dive deep into work or get lost in distractions, and I chose to focus on my health. I wanted to rise above feelings of betrayal and find joy again. Thanks to Colleen and the staff, I hope to be more than just another broken marriage statistic. It was Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the barbecue. I was fixing myself a quiet dinner of lamb cutlets and gnocchi with a tangy applesauce when the doorbell rang. Having just finished cooking, I tossed the towel I was using onto the table and walked to the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see a lovely blonde woman standing there. She was a little over 5 feet tall and looked a bit nervous. Before I could greet her, she stepped closer, pulled me down by my shirt, and kissed me. At first, I was taken aback, but her soft lips surprised me. I could taste mint on her breath, and before I knew it, I found myself kissing her back. She wrapped her arms around my waist, and instinctively, I pulled her closer, lost in the moment. I had no idea how long the kiss lasted, but it felt amazing. When we finally parted, I looked at the woman and noticed tears in her eyes. But before I could say anything, she stepped back and gave me a light slap. It wasn't hard. It felt more like a gesture. I stood there in astonishment, my surprise apparent. The woman looked a bit sad, but also filled with kindness. "I'm sorry, Gregory. That wasn't the best way to say hello," she said. Her voice was warm, yet firm, reminding me of a young actress I admired. I tilted my head, curious about her. Okay," I replied, not quite sure what to say next. "Rebecca," she introduced herself simply. "Rebecca," I repeated, taking it in. For a moment, we stood in silence. "So, Rebecca," I asked, looking at her curiously, "what brings you to my door this evening?" She smiled playfully. "You," she answered. "I guess I should have figured that out from your greeting. But why are you here?" I asked, a smile creeping onto my face. She seemed like a playful kitten. "Because you need me," she answered, her smile matching mine. "Really?" I said. "So tell me, why do I need you? I mean, I enjoy a kiss like anyone else, but after that, I'm left confused by your reaction." Now, I noticed a sparkle in her eyes. "You think I'm beautiful?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I nodded. "You are gorgeous," I added, feeling quite taken by her. "Thank you, Gregory," she said, her cheeks turning red as she gazed down. She wore a dark blue sundress that looked lovely against her blonde hair. I caught a glimpse of her strong legs that were matched by a lovely face, high cheekbones, big blue eyes, and a cute nose. She was someone who would turn heads as she walked by. "Something smells nice?" she asked, sniffing the air. I sighed happily with the little game and opened the door for the woman who seemed to be here for me. I felt sure she meant no harm, and I was curious about her visit. We chatted about simple things for a moment as I led her to the kitchen. I grabbed a glass, looked at her briefly, and then poured her a bit of Shiraz I had been enjoying lately. I set the glass down in front of her, and she raised an eyebrow as I stepped back to finish making dinner. Luckily, I was also preparing some leftovers for lunch the next day at work, so I quickly set another plate for Rebecca. She watched me as I cooked, holding the wine without drinking it. I placed a plate in front of her and another in the seat beside her before returning with silverware and my own glass of wine after dimming the kitchen lights. Rebecca giggled as the light in the room softened. "Our first date and you ordered for me?" she said casually. "Well, a woman likes a man who knows her taste," I replied. Rebecca threw her head back and laughed, then looked me in the eyes and raised her glass. "To Gregory Other, showing that even when things are tough, he still knows how to treat a lady," she said, making a toast. We clinked our glasses and took a sip of wine, smiling. I let Rebecca try the meal first, and when she cut off a nice piece of meat and dipped it in the sauce, her eyes lit up. "Gregory, this is amazing, thank you." I nodded and tried my meal too. It was good. The sauce had just the right balance of sweet and sour for both my taste and, it seemed, hers. "So, Rebecca, let's skip the games. Who are you, and what's going on here?" I asked. She took another bite and a sip of wine before looking a bit nervous. "First, thank you, Gregory. There were many ways you could have reacted to me showing up, and you handled it so well. I was outside your door for almost 20 minutes before I knocked." I nodded and took a sip of my own wine. "As for who I am, we've met a couple of times before. I'm Colleen's niece." I let that sink in for a moment, and then it clicked. "Ah, Rebecca, yes. Sorry, you look so different from our last meeting," I replied. She smiled, but I could see some sadness there, though it seemed old. I had indeed met Rebecca before when she looked very different. Back then, she was going through a phase, following someone Colleen had warned me about. The first time we met, she had jet black hair and a lot of piercings. She had a lot of light makeup on and wore dark clothes and boots that any goth would admire. "I was getting through a tough time," she told me while smiling. "It was about a month after I split up with my boyfriend. I didn't know who I was and felt lost. Aunt Colleen talked to my mom and brought me here for a change." I nodded and took another sip of my drink, thinking back to when she came to the office. She visited about 5 times over a month, always dressed in black. I remembered her once beautiful blonde hair, which was now dyed black. She wore dark lipstick and eyeliner, along with some piercings in her face that were gone now. "He was seeing 3 people, 2 girls and a guy," she said simply, pulling me out of my thoughts. I nearly choked on my drink. "What?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah," she said, looking down at her glass. "We were at a club, and after some drinks, we went back to the guy's place. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, he was with one of the girls." She glanced at me quickly before looking back at her drink. Even though I was a bit tipsy, I couldn't believe it. I'm someone who believes in being with just one person. I understand some people are attracted to more than one, but that's not me. "I also prefer not to be in groups," she said, meeting my eyes for a moment. "Me too," I replied. I saw her relax a bit. "Anyway," Rebecca continued, "I yelled and ran home to my parents in tears for 3 days. After a week, my mom encouraged me to go out with Aunt Colleen, and that's when I met you." I smiled. "I remember meeting you," she said, smiling shyly. "Aunt Colleen introduced us, and you shook my hand. You didn't see me as a sad goth girl who had just been let down. You didn't judge how I looked or my piercings. Do you remember what you asked?" I nodded. "I asked what kind of coffee you wanted." Rebecca smiled. "Yes. Double shot mocha with extra chocolate," we both said at the same time. We both laughed. "You do remember," Rebecca said, her smile brightening. I nodded and took another sip of my drink, but her smile faded. "The slap was because I was at the barbecue the other day and you didn't notice me," she said, looking into my eyes. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. It was a tough day," I replied genuinely. She gave me a small smile. "It's okay, Gregory. I didn't mean for it to be a serious slap. I get that you were distracted. I just thought of you kissing me and then not seeing me, so I slapped you jokingly." I even got to hug you that day and say it would be okay, but I guess everyone was around, and you probably don't remember much of that day." I looked at her for a moment, considering her words. I remembered the image of gentle hands on my chest and someone wearing dark blue jeans and a red blouse, reassuring me that everything would be okay. "Do you remember?" she asked, reading my thoughts. "Sort of," I replied. "Red top, blue jeans?" Rebecca smiled and nodded. "Recently, I talked to Aunt Colleen about you," Rebecca said, her cheeks reddening a bit. "She knows I might like you a little, especially after she saw us hug at the barbecue. She encouraged me to reach out and talk to you." I chuckled softly. "Did you know you were coming to kiss me?" "No," Rebecca said, blushing more. "Honestly, I wasn't sure I could do it, but when you opened the door, I decided to go for it." I smiled and took her hand. "I'm really glad you did. It was the best thing to happen to me in a long time." Rebecca smiled back, and we talked for the next 3 hours. She helped me clean up after dinner, and then we continued talking while enjoying a small glass of port in my living room. I learned she was 28, a few years younger than me, and had just finished her degree in finance. She liked various kinds of music but wasn't a fan of death metal, especially after her goth phase. Rebecca had found a junior accounting job at a manufacturing company, where she worked in the accounts department and enjoyed her role for the most part. She was very close to her family. Her parents had been married for 30 years, and she hoped they would be together for many more. She had one younger sister who lived in New Zealand, but they could only talk about once a month. Rebecca enjoyed visiting the beach, but had sensitive skin, so she usually stayed out of the water. She had 2 boyfriends in the past, one of whom let her down, and she regretted giving him her trust. We shared many stories that evening. I told her about my strained relationship with my mother after my father passed away unexpectedly. I also mentioned my younger sister, but we didn't talk anymore because of a family argument. It was almost 1 in the morning when Rebecca decided to leave. We both thought about her staying over, but she felt it would be better for us to get to know each other more first. I got a sweet kiss goodbye as she left. As I lay in bed, I fell asleep with a smile for the first time in ages. Rebecca's unexpected actions had broken down some of the walls I had built around my heart. That kiss surprised me and made me realize someone might care for me in a special way. The next morning, I couldn't help but smile, and everyone noticed. By lunchtime, Aunt Colleen approached me. "Okay, tell me everything, Greg." "Who is she?" Colleen asked, full of hope. "Rebecca came by last night," I replied. Colleen let out a happy squeal that echoed through the office. She jumped up and down, clasping her hands and beaming at me. Then she guided me to the kitchen, eager to hear everything. She laughed when I shared the story about the kiss and the playful slap. I told her about our dinner and how we chatted until early morning. "Greg, I'm so happy for you. Even if nothing comes from it, it's great to see you move on from what Jillian and her friend did to you." She paused and added with a teasing grin, "But you and Becca, I think there might be something special there." I felt it for a while. We chatted a bit longer, and Colleen asked if I would see Rebecca again. I told her we had been texting nonstop and were going out for dinner on Friday night. Her joy was contagious and brightened the whole office. Friday night arrived, and I drove to pick up Rebecca. I asked her to dress nicely for our first proper date, wanting it to be memorable. She didn't disappoint. I knocked on her apartment door, and once again, she took my breath away. Rebecca wore a lovely black dress with thin straps. Her long blonde hair was pulled back, and she had a matching shawl over her shoulders, along with a stylish clutch. My eyes admired her graceful legs, and she wore modest heels. She smiled, twirled playfully, and laughed. "Wow, I think I'm doing great so far," she teased. "You seem speechless." Before she could say more, I stepped closer and hugged her. I looked into her eyes for a moment, leaned in, and kissed her softly. "Hello, beautiful," I said as I let go of the hug. "Wow," Rebecca said, her eyes closed. I chuckled, and when she opened her eyes, she smiled brightly. We walked outside hand in hand, and when I reached for the car door, Rebecca paused, staring in surprise. "This is your car?" she asked. "Yes," I answered, and her eyes widened. "Yes, I'm a Mustang fan, and not just any Mustang. I own a 1967 GT. It's classic gray with black racing stripes and some upgraded features. I was surprised Jillian didn't try to take it in the divorce, but she likely knew I wouldn't have let that happen. This car was my treasure, only brought out for special moments. I opened the passenger door for Rebecca. She was grinning widely as she climbed into the seat. As I started the car, Rebecca giggled, and her laughter filled the air as the powerful engine rumbled underneath us. We drove into town, chatting about our week at work, especially how Colleen spoke to both of us with her encouraging words. We had dinner at a nice Japanese restaurant where we tried a variety of dishes. Even though I'm not a big fan of it, we both had a little sake. It was fun for the night, but not something we usually drink. After dinner, we decided to check out the casino. We placed a few bets and ended up winning a little over $600 within that hour. The casino also featured a club, so we went in, dressed up for a good night out. The club was lively, with people of different ages all ready to have a good time. We danced for what felt like hours, and I had to admit, I enjoyed it when Rebecca playfully danced close to me, holding my hands. Throughout the night, a few guys approached her to ask for a dance. As I mentioned, she looked fantastic. Each time, she kindly but firmly said no. At one point, I returned from the bar with drinks when a man stopped me and put a hand on my shoulder. "You've got a great girl. I hope you know that," he told me. He noticed my confused look and continued, "Your girlfriend is really attractive. I asked her to dance while you were at the bar and she turned me down. Can you believe that?" The guy seemed confident and fit, likely someone who had charm. I sensed he might have had success with women before, but Rebecca had clearly chosen to stay with me. He smiled and walked away. Saturday morning, I woke up slowly, smiling as I remembered the wonderful night Rebecca and I had. The sun was shining through the blinds as I lay there thinking about our dinner, dancing, and the great conversations we shared. Just then, I remembered that amazing kiss before I left her. I turned over to find her beside me, peacefully sleeping with her eyes closed and breathing softly. I looked at her face and remembered how we came back to my place without even saying a word. She followed me into the bedroom, took off her dress, and got into bed with me. "If you're going to look at me like that, you better do something about it," Rebecca said playfully, her eyes still closed but a big smile on her face. I smiled back and tucked myself under the covers, moving closer to her. I felt her warmth against me as our lips met. Just like the first time we met, our lips came together in a sweet moment that made me feel a deep connection with Rebecca. As we kissed, she pulled me closer, and I felt her moving gently against me. "Rebecca?" I asked when our kissing slowed for a breath. She responded, lost in the moment. "Rebecca?" I said again. She opened her eyes and looked at me. I saw desire in her eyes and something deeper that made me a little scared to name. Love. For a moment, she stayed in that dreamy place, but I think she sensed my feelings. "Gregory, are you okay?" she asked, looking surprised. "If you're worried, we didn't do anything, just kissed and slept." I shifted, propping myself up a bit. "Rebecca, I started but paused. She didn't say anything. She moved a little, and for a brief moment I caught a glimpse of her. She quickly covered herself, knowing this was an important moment that wasn't the right time for fun. She waited for me to find my words. "I'm scared," I confessed. "What Jillian did hurt me in ways I can't really explain. I felt like I was never enough, like I had failed." Rebecca nodded, keeping quiet and letting me talk. "I've been through so many emotions this past year, pain, anger, sadness, and feeling lost. But now I'm scared, and it's not about Jillian. I'm scared about you," I finished. Rebecca reached out and gently touched my cheek. The look of understanding she gave me almost made me cry. "I understand, Gregory. Jillian hurt you a lot," Rebecca said softly but firmly. "Even though I went through my own pain, it's different because you really tried to connect with her, and you faced rejection." I nodded and took a deep breath. "I'm scared, Becca, because I think I'm falling in love with you. I'm worried that I'm broken and that I can't give you what you need." In a surprising move, she pulled me close, resting my head on her chest. "Shh, my wonderful man," she said softly. "I'm here for you," she said gently. "I can see you're going through a hard time. Let me help. Just share whatever you're comfortable with, and don't hold back." I lifted my head, and for a moment we locked eyes. Then we leaned in closer, and soon our lips met in a warm, comforting kiss. The feeling grew between us, natural and easy. As we held each other, I felt her warmth and kindness. She was close, drawing me in, and we found comfort just being there side by side, in each other's presence. There was no need for words, just a shared understanding and peace. Later we lay together, quietly enjoying the calm of the moment. The silence spoke for us, and we felt at ease, appreciating the simplicity of being close. After a while we drifted off, feeling lighter and more at peace than before. We lay there, simply happy to be in each other's company, resting side by side in quiet connection. I found that looking at pictures in my own hand could not compare to being with a willing partner. I felt a shift next to me, and, thinking Rebecca was reaching for a tissue, I was surprised to see her holding her phone. "Smile, sweetie," Rebecca said, taking a selfie with her head resting on my shoulder. "But Rebecca?" I questioned. "Don't worry, I have a private folder on my phone just for us. I've never taken a picture like this before or let someone be so close to me." Just then, my phone beeped with a message. Rebecca had sent me the photo. "Greg, I trust you," she added. I got up for a moment to fetch a wet washcloth from the bathroom. When I returned, Rebecca was purring contentedly. I gently helped clean her face before leaning in for a kiss. "Greg, sweetheart." I smiled, knowing it was now her turn for attention. I began kissing down her neck, and though we had been together for a while, I took a moment to appreciate my new girlfriend. Rebecca had a slim figure. While she wasn't overly large, she had a nice shape. Her skin was smooth, and I quickly found that with a little attention, she could feel very good. As I explored further, I noticed her graceful form. She enjoyed running, which was quite evident. I couldn't help but think I wanted to be with her for the long run. I gently pulled down the black satin panties she had worn, noticing her smooth skin. Rebecca smiled and relaxed, inviting me in. I found myself anticipating what was to come. The moment I touched her, she began to respond positively. I took my time, making sure to create a sweet moment that lasted for some time, enjoying every bit of her reaction. "Greg?" Rebecca asked after a while, smiling down at me. I looked up at her, feeling happy. "Take me," she said softly. I moved up her body and, without any hesitation, connected with her deeply. Rebecca wrapped her legs around me, and we both sighed in contentment. It started slowly, but we soon found our rhythm, spending nearly an hour wrapped up in each other. Words were few. Our actions spoke volumes. Afterwards, we lay together, feeling warm and content. "Thank you," I said to her. I felt her smile against me. "You're welcome, sweetie. Are you okay?" "Better," I responded. "You gave me a wonderful gift today. You brought back my confidence." I felt her hold me tighter. "Yes, but now it's mine. No one else will ever have it." That weekend, we hardly left the bed except to shower or grab something to eat. We didn't put on any clothes until Monday morning when it was time to go to work. I had to drive Rebecca back to her apartment in the dress she wore on Friday night. She also chose to go without anything underneath, which excited me. By the time I reached the office, I had 2 more pictures of my girlfriend. In the second one, she had used a pen to write Gregory's on her stomach. That week, Rebecca spent every night at my place except for Wednesday, when she worked late, and it was easier for her to get things from her apartment. At my office, Colleen never asked too many questions, but she seemed to enjoy the news of my relationship with her niece. I never outright said it, but I think Colleen understood that we were close. "Hey, Greg," James said one Tuesday after getting coffee. "Do you have a few minutes?" He closed the door without waiting for my answer. "Sure," I replied, raising an eyebrow and motioning for him to shut the door completely. I could tell he wanted to discuss something important, probably related to Jillian. "So, how are things going with you and Rebecca?" he asked. "Yeah," I smiled. "It feels like we've been together for a long time, even though it's only been a few months." "I understand that. Sherry and I have been together for almost 5 years, but it feels much longer." James looked worried for a moment. "Oh, but not in a bad way. I mean, it's just—" I raised my hand and laughed a little. "I understand, James. It's not a bad thing." He nodded. Sherry and I are really happy to see you smiling again. We were wondering if you both would like to come over for dinner Saturday night? There was something hopeful in his tone that made me curious. I don't think we have anything planned, but I'll check with Becca. He nodded again. Greg, James said. Getting to the main reason, he closed the door. I sighed. Is it about Jillian? I asked. Kind of, James replied. You know about the Kensington audit we're working on? He asked. I was aware and nodded. Kensington was one of the two major companies we were dealing with. James was sitting in the second chair looking over some financial reports. We found a few problems and I need some help, he said to me. Okay, show me what you got, I replied. James spread out several reports on the table. Among the issues, it seemed that one of their middle managers had been taking money from the company and using it for some troubling things, including sending money to a woman and a child in the United States. From the audit log, it appeared this had been happening for several years. The manager was good at hiding the money by spreading it around different projects and accounts. The total amount taken was just under $2 million. I leaned back, trying to absorb everything. I was shocked by what this meant. Let me make sure I understand, I said to James. For more than 4 years, he's been taking money from the company for personal use, and it seems like he's also been using company funds to support a woman and child in another country. James nodded. That's correct. Wow, I said, trying to keep a straight face. That's quite a story. James chuckled. A month later, we gave an initial report to Kensington but kept the details to ourselves until we finished tracking down more information. They were worried about someone potentially cheating them and agreed that it was important to find out how serious the issue was before taking any steps. We asked for another month to investigate, and they accepted. 2 weeks later, on a Friday night, I arrived home to find Becca had let herself in and set up a candlelight dinner. She had poured me a drink and had a glass of red wine for herself. As we shared a meal of chicken bosquiola, I noticed a box in front of us. It wasn't the main topic of conversation, but I could tell Becca was aware of it. After dinner, while we were cleaning up and refilling our drinks, we moved to the lounge. Becca had dimmed the lights and started playing soft music. Greg, I just want to say that the last 6 months have been the best of my life, she said. I opened my mouth to respond, but she raised her hand. Wait, I just need to say this. She smiled warmly. I know you were hurting when we first got together, but I was too. I've had some ups and downs in my past, and what we have feels incredible because we give so much to each other. I love being with you, and I look forward to coming home to you every day. I mentioned that I had a crush on you when we first met, and that's true. But I love you, Gregory. I really need you to know this as you open the box. With that, Rebecca set her drink aside and handed me the box that was on the kitchen table during dinner, now sitting on the floor before us. She passed it to me but didn't pick up her glass again, looking at me with anticipation. The box was small, about the size you would use to ship a pair of headphones from Amazon. It wasn't sealed, so I gently lifted the lid. Inside was another box, but resting on top of it was an envelope. I picked up the envelope and glanced at Rebecca. She looked a bit nervous but nodded as I unfolded the letter inside. Gregory, inside this box is the engagement ring you bought last week. I found it by accident last weekend while I was cleaning up and you were in the shower. I really hope that you will open this box, take out the ring, and ask me to marry you. I love you so much. Yours truly and forever, Rebecca Brown. P.S. I love you, love you, love you. I looked back at Rebecca, seeing hope on her face, and silently mouthed, I love you too, as I opened the second box. In the middle of soft tissue paper was the ring box I had chosen, which held a simple gold band with a single diamond shining in the center. I smiled at Rebecca as I took out the box. I never looked inside the ring box, my love, Rebecca said. I wanted to, but I didn't. I nodded, then knelt down in front of her. Even though Rebecca had planned this moment a bit earlier than I expected, she gasped and smiled. Rebecca Brown, from the moment you came to my door, you have shown me love. You have lifted me up and made me feel alive again. Before you kissed me the first time, I didn't think I would ever feel happy again. Waking up next to you for the first time amazed me as I saw how much you wanted to be close to me. In this world, I couldn't dream of a more beautiful partner. You always surprised me by taking chances but never letting me down. I had planned to do this in a couple of weeks at your family's barbecue. I don't think we can let this moment slip away. I opened the ring box. "Rebecca Beth Brown, will you marry me?" I asked. The words had barely left my mouth when she dropped to her knees and shouted, "Yes!" She extended her hand, and I placed the engagement ring on her finger. Then she kissed me, a warm kiss that filled me with joy. "Thank you, my fiancé," I said to her. "You will have the best wife and wait until we have kids. I can't wait for our family." Rebecca knew how much I wanted to talk about kids, and she loved teasing me about it. Just then, the doorbell rang, and I sighed as I had to step away from her to answer the door, not keeping her company to celebrate our new engagement. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Colleen, along with Rebecca's parents, James and Sherry. "Congratulations!" They all cheered as I opened the door. I felt someone hug me from behind. "Sorry, I wanted to celebrate our engagement, so I invited a few people over. Just one last surprise for tonight," my soon-to-be wife said with a smile. We welcomed everyone inside, and her parents brought 2 bottles of sparkling juice. As they passed around glasses, I pretended to be upset since I had no idea about the surprise, but I couldn't help smiling. While Rebecca showed her ring to the ladies, her dad and James patted my back. We all sat down and spent the rest of the evening enjoying stories about our childhoods. Later that night, after everyone had left, Rebecca and I went to bed. Before we fell asleep, she asked me to take a few more pictures of her with her engagement ring. In those photos, she was happy and proud. About a month later, a lot happened in just 2 days. First, we delivered the completed forensic audit to Kensington. As we reviewed the report with them, it was clear they were not pleased. Heads would definitely turn, and the authorities might get involved. I tried to hide my excitement as I handed over the report. Kensington management didn't know I had an issue with the main person behind the fraud. The second thing happened that same afternoon. Rebecca had taken the afternoon off work to come into my office with some papers, wedding ideas, and to bring joy to the staff. While reading through the legal papers she handed me, I felt angry at my future bride for the first time. "Becca, you can't be serious about this document," I said, feeling more upset as I read on. "Why, love? This should help you feel secure about our upcoming marriage. You'll be protected, your house, the business, everything," she said. "I understand, Becca, but it's not fair to you. This agreement leaves you with nearly nothing," I replied. "It doesn't. I only have nothing if I cheat on you, which I would never do," she answered. "In every other situation, the things we share will be divided equally, and your business and assets are still safe." "Becca, I know you want to show me how much you care because of what happened with Jillian, but the protections I already have are enough." Rebecca raised her hand to stop me. "I get it, Greg, trust me. But this is my promise to you. The only way I'd end up with nothing is if I betray you. That's not going to happen," she said, holding my hands. I picked up a pen and signed the document. "I'm going to trust you, Becca. I know, love. We'll put this away and never need it." For the rest of the afternoon, we talked about the document a few more times. In the end, she was right. It went into a filing cabinet to gather dust. The third thing that happened occurred the next evening at home. I had just arrived, and Rebecca, who had moved in for good, asked me to take a shower. As I finished up, I heard shouting. I quickly put on some shorts and rushed out to the entry. "So I move out and he just moves on to someone else?" I heard my ex-wife yelling at Rebecca. I heard Rebecca laugh. "You walked out the door plain and simple. You left a kind man and broke his heart. And I am not someone else," Rebecca replied, making air quotes with her fingers. I stayed back out of sight in the hallway. "But sure, I'll own that title. I'm Gregory's special partner. He gets all of me. Can you say the same about your marriage to him?" my fiancé retorted at Jillian. "You're a terrible person," I heard Jillian yell, followed by the sound of a slap. I took that as my cue to step into the room. Both women turned to look at me with Jillian holding her cheek. I chuckled. "Rebecca," I said, smiling, "meet Jillian, my ex-wife. Jillian, meet Rebecca, my fiancé." For a moment, both women stared at each other before I stepped between them. "Do you find this funny, Greg?" Jillian asked. "Actually," I paused, Yes, I do. You weren't invited, and you started shouting at my fiancé before that happened. Maybe it's just a bit of payback for how things ended between us. Rebecca gave Jillian a look, but I raised my hand. Enough, Becca. She took a step back, still glaring at my ex. What do you want, Jillian? I sighed. Why did you do it, Greg? Do it. Why did you have to ruin my life? She asked, her anger shifting towards me. What do you mean, Jillian? I replied innocently. I haven't had any contact with you in almost a year. You left me for someone else, and that's when everything changed. Rebecca let out a small laugh behind me. Jillian shot a frustrated look at Rebecca before turning back to me. You didn't have to hurt Troy, she said, her voice softening. I couldn't help but chuckle, which made Jillian look a bit pale. You need to be clearer, Jillian, I replied, crossing my arms. Rebecca wrapped her arms around my waist. It was your audit that got Troy into trouble. You didn't have to do that, she said, her tone quieter now. Should I ignore fraud when I see it? Your new love took money from the company for bad reasons, I said to her. Fraud? Jillian asked, her face going pale. What do you mean? It was clear she didn't know everything. Yes, Jillian. The person you left me for had issues that you didn't know about. He used company money for harmful things. It's all in the report. I can share it with you if you want. She sank to the ground, looking defeated. It was the first time I saw her truly lost, her understanding of her life crumbling away. Rebecca and I watched as she sat on the front porch. Troy has been arrested, Jillian told us, the earlier anger replaced by emptiness in her voice. I hadn't known, but I suspected he would be in trouble soon. We've been married less than 3 months, and he's already in trouble, Jillian said. We watched her break down into tears. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little sympathy for her. I was married to her for several years. We shared tender moments and talked about our dreams. I cared for her, but she also caused me a lot of pain. In a very harsh way, she left me without a second thought. I try to be a good person, but I struggled to stay kind when it came to Jillian. What should I do, Greg? Jillian asked, looking at Rebecca and me. Rebecca answered instead of me. You really have the nerve to ask him that after how you treated him? Rebecca said firmly, yet without anger. Jillian's spirit seemed to return a bit. He was mine long before he was yours, Jillian shot back. Rebecca laughed and held me a little tighter. He was never really yours, Jillian. You never opened your heart to him completely. You must have kept a part of yourself away to do what you did. That's not true, Jillian argued, looking at me. I felt like a statue as I watched the conversation. I gave everything to Greg when we were married. Rebecca chuckled. Sure you did. That's why the moment your true love returned, you began seeing him behind your husband's back. You embarrassed him in front of others and tried to take his home, his investments, and his business. Right? That's really giving yourself to Greg. For a moment, Jillian was silent. I felt like she might just disappear, understanding the consequences of her actions. Rebecca stood up and walked over to Jillian with surprising kindness. Jillian, Rebecca said softly, you don't know my story. When I first met Greg, I wasn't in a good place. He was happily married to you, and I could see how much he loved you during our brief talks. I later learned more about him, and I must admit I felt a bit jealous of you. Jillian looked up, surprised. Rebecca continued, and I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. When I found out what you did to him, I was furious. I wanted to confront you and show you what you were giving up. Jillian nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the ground. But then, Rebecca said, glancing at me and smiling, I was at a barbecue for Greg the weekend his divorce from you was finalized. Jillian looked at me, pain evident in her eyes. I stayed silent, curious about where Rebecca was headed. He was in shock. Even Aunt Colleen struggled to reach him. Jillian quickly turned to Rebecca, surprised by what she said. Rebecca continued. Yes, Colleen is my aunt, Rebecca began. Anyway, Greg was in a rough place. You'd left him and he was struggling. The kind, gentle person I'd known had changed. My heart hurt seeing him that way. Both women looked at me, then Rebecca with warmth, and Jillian with regret. That evening, though Greg didn't notice, everyone there was trying to support him. He was open about his pain, and people could see how deeply he'd been hurt. I think almost everyone at the barbecue gave him a hug, including me. Rebecca gave me a soft smile. Jillian pulled her knees up to her chest, hugging them as she listened. After I hugged him, he thanked me. I realized then that I could help. I knew I could be there for him, helping him out of that dark place. That was the moment I felt a pull in my heart to be a part of his life and bring him comfort. We all sat silently for a moment. The next week, I came by to see him, and when he opened the door, Rebecca continued, smiling at the memory, I gave him a big, warm hug and then gave him a playful slap on the shoulder, telling him he needed to look after himself. Jillian's eyes widened, looking between Rebecca and me as we both shared a smile, thinking back to that day. That was it, Jillian, Rebecca went on. From then on, I knew I wanted to be by his side. I'd never loved anyone like I love Greg. The thought of hurting him like you did is unimaginable to me. You let go of someone who could have given you everything. And in a way, am grateful because it brought him into my life. There was another moment of silence as each of us got lost in our own thoughts, reflecting on how things had led us here. How can you say that? Jillian finally asked Rebecca, looking down. How can you say he's your everything? What about your past relationships? Rebecca chuckled. Jillian, my past relationships don't even compare. This feels different, deeper. Greg means the world to me, and am grateful for the chance to love and support him. He's shown me what real love is, and I can't imagine life any other way. Rebecca glanced at me, and we shared a quiet understanding, knowing we had found something special together. Did you ever come home early and surprise him when he arrived? Did you ever ask him to show you his love in a way that made you feel truly wanted? Jillian was a bit shocked by Rebecca's bold words. Rebecca was clearly enjoying the moment. And you know he really knows how to love. He has so much energy. And Jillian, remember how amazing he is at showing affection? Why wouldn't I want to give him everything I have? Look. She paused and took out her phone, and I could see Jillian's eyes growing wide as Rebecca opened her private collection of photos, scrolling until she found the first one they took together. This, Rebecca said, holding the phone up for Jillian to see, was me asking Greg to show his love for me. I wanted him to feel connected to me. Just the thought of him being so close was overwhelming. To me, it felt like the best feeling ever. He is my partner, and I am his. Jillian was breathing heavily, her face red with a mix of embarrassment and emotions. Rebecca kept going. You wonder how I can be so open. It's simple. To me, there's no greater way to show my love for Greg than by being open with him. Rebecca put away her phone. Jillian leaned back against the wall, looking defeated. What do I do now? She asked softly. I gave up everything for a dream. Rebecca shrugged. Honestly, I don't mind what you do. Jillian looked at her, surprised. I'm just reminding you of what you lost, and that I won't let you back into his life. He is mine, and if you try anything well, I can be very protective of my happiness. Rebecca then came back to my side. I finally spoke. Jillian, my ex looked at me, defeated. Rebecca is right. She is my partner, and I fully commit to her. We're planning to get married and start a family, hoping to love each other deeply for the rest of our lives. And about love, it's true. I don't feel the same way for you anymore. I remember having loved you, but because of your betrayal and with Rebecca in my life, that love is gone. If Jillian could look any more heartbroken, I couldn't imagine how. And to be honest, I added, I don't really have good feelings for you. You hurt me deeply, more than anyone else ever has. But since I once loved you, I will give you some advice. Jillian looked up at me. Leave Troy, I said. Get away from him before things get worse. He's facing serious consequences for what he's done. Where will I go? She asked. I shrugged. I don't know. Maybe Mark and Lena will let you stay with them. They're getting a divorce, Jillian said sadly. I replied, I'm not surprised. Cheating can do that. Look, Jillian, you need to sort this out on your own. I can't help you. We're just two people who had something for a while. Is that how you really feel? Is there no hope for us to be friends? Jillian asked hopefully. No, both Rebecca and I answered together. Jillian then stood up and shook her head sadly. She looked at Rebecca and me standing close together. Jillian sighed. Thank you for your honesty. I wish we could have stayed friends. At the start, I hoped things would be different. but I see now that it was just a dream. I... She paused, shaking her head again. Thank you. No one else has been so honest with me. Take care of each other. I hope you both have a happy life together. With that, she walked to her car, got in, gave us a sad look, and drove away. Over the next month, more news about Troy's arrest came out. Our discovery of the fraud was reported, and we had to almost double our staff by the end of the year because of the increased demand for our services. Rebecca and I had a small wedding with friends and family. We spent our honeymoon in North Queensland, enjoying 2 lovely weeks on the beautiful beaches. When we returned home, we got into a nice routine of work, love, and dreaming about the future. We talked about having children. Rebecca decided to stop using birth control, and we would see what happened. We were close every day, and I appreciated how excited she was about starting a family. About a month after we began trying, I received a call from her as I was heading home. She asked if I was on my way, and I confirmed that I was. But when I got home, it was oddly quiet. As I walked in, I didn't hear anything, and it felt strange. I set my bag down on a chair and called out for Rebecca, but there was no answer. I was a little worried. She had just called me a short while ago, and her car was in the garage, so where could she be? I walked through the house calling for her and stopped when I entered the bedroom. Rebecca was there, but I quickly realized why she hadn't answered my call. As I stepped into the room, she turned to hear me but couldn't see me because of something covering her eyes. She couldn't talk either, and it seemed she was unable to move. In front of her was a small coffee table with a feather, some oils, a letter, and a few other items. I picked up the letter and opened it. Gregory, my love, as you read this and look at me, I want you to know I have committed myself to you. I'm here with you, Rebecca had written in her letter. I may not be able to move, speak, or see you, but I can feel and hear you. I'm here, always yours. I placed the letter down, feeling a warmth of affection and appreciation for her as I looked over to where she rested. She seemed calm, her face peaceful, with a soft, contented smile. Rebecca had always shown her care and trust with me. I leaned down, gently brushed her cheek, and smiled as she responded with a soft laugh. Her laughter and the warmth of the moment lifted my spirits. The evening was filled with light-hearted moments, laughter, and soft whispers. We simply enjoyed being together, sharing stories, and letting the night drift by. It was a peaceful and comforting closeness, and I was grateful for it. Later, we shared a quiet meal and laughed over memories, letting the joy of the moment surround us. We cherished the simplicity of just being there for each other, knowing that nothing more was needed. The night was filled with warmth and happiness as we enjoyed each other's presence, a reminder of the strong connection and comfort we shared. I smiled at the last moment as I held my wife close, feeling a rush of happiness. After a sweet moment together, I kissed her gently. When I lifted the blindfold, I saw her eyes filled with pure love. I love you, Gregory, she said softly. I love you too, Rebecca, I replied. I released her hands and feet, and she showed me how she had tied herself up, keeping one arm free until I was almost home. We cuddled for a while before Rebecca playfully jumped on top of me, asking for another chance to create a family. After a cozy shower and changing the bed sheets, I felt sure that our first child was on the way, born from love and a deep connection. I felt a happiness I had never known before. 9 months later, our first daughter, Sarah, was born. Just under 2 years after that, we welcomed twins, Henry and Peter, and finally, our little Bridget arrived. After Bridget's birth, Rebecca and I decided that our family was complete, so I took steps to ensure that we wouldn't have any more children. In the years that followed, our lives were filled with joy and love. Sure, we had our typical family issues and disagreements, but love always filled our home. On a chilly winter morning, it was time to say goodbye to Rebecca as we laid her to rest. She bravely fought cancer for 2 years. Until her last moments, she gave everything to our children and me. Even when she was weak, we would lay together as husband and wife, and she would tell me how much she needed my love. "Baby," Rebecca said, even while in pain, trying to stay alert. We were cuddled together. "You're going to be okay, you know that. I won't leave you alone." "I know," I said, stroking her hair. "We'll be apart for only a little while before I find you again." Rebecca smiled, thinking of a time when I got stuck in a blizzard, waiting for her at a cabin in Canada. For weeks, we communicated through video calls, and she showed me the many ways to make the most of our time apart. When I finally arrived, we spent an unforgettable week together. "Will you miss me?" she asked. "Of course I will miss you with all my heart," I replied. We lay there, comfortable in our quiet connection. Not long after, she clutched my arm tightly. "I'm scared," Rebecca admitted, tears forming in her eyes. I can feel my body shutting down. Her tears fell onto my chest, and I couldn't help but cry, too. We had been married for over 30 years, had 4 children, 6 grandchildren, and another on the way, traveling the world together, and now this. "Shh," I whispered. "He'll be here the whole time. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," Rebecca replied. "That's what keeps me going." We were quiet for a few moments. "Greg?" Rebecca called softly. "Yes, my dear?" I said, gently kissing the top of her head while holding my wife close. "Be with me one more time. I want my last memories to be of us together." She asked quietly. I smiled as we shared a tender moment for what would be the last time. The next day, the kids came with their families, and we all gathered around Rebecca. She seemed much weaker than the day before. We could all see she was nearing the end as her skin changed color. Throughout the day, we shared stories, laughing and remembering the good times. We cried and even sang together in those final hours. The kids said their goodbyes and then stood close to the bed while I held my wife. "I love you," I told her, feeling like we had only moments left together. Tears began to fill my eyes. "And I love you," she replied softly, her eyes starting to lose their spark. Her frail hand reached up and touched my cheek, reminding me of our first days together. We smiled, and she pulled me closer for a kiss. Suddenly it felt as if all the years had melted away. In my arms, I saw her as she once was, without illness, youthful and full of life. Her eyes shone with love, and I felt overwhelmed by her affection. Even as she took her last breath, I felt the warmth of her love. I held on, my eyes closed, tears soaking the sheets as she slipped away. I cried, feeling like a part of me was gone forever. My family surrounded me, and we all wept openly. Rebecca, my wife and the mother of my 4 children, had been my true love, my soulmate. I knew life would be different without her. But I also felt a sense of peace. She was free from the pain caused by her illness. Afterward, I realized that even though she was gone, I would always have reminders of our life together. Our kids were a constant presence, and almost every weekend I spent time with them or visited. James and Sherry often brought their family around, too. I was never alone. As the months passed, I was grateful for my family and friends. If I felt lonely at night, I had countless photos and videos of our time together, which always brought a smile to my face. They reminded me of the love we shared, and I cherished those memories. Often after my release in previous years, I would imagine her with me, gently kissing me as I fell asleep, happy in our love and knowing we would be together again someday. About 6 months after Rebecca's passing, I was enjoying a coffee on a Saturday morning at our local coffee shop. Suddenly, a shadow crossed over me and stopped. "Gregory?" A voice I had not heard in over 30 years said. "Jillian," I replied, recognizing the older version of the woman I once loved. For some reason, I gestured to the seat across from me. "Care to join me?" I asked. She paused for a moment, then nodded and sat down. As I looked at her, I noticed the lines on her face, the tired look in her eyes, the freckles on her arms, and her thin frame. I hadn't kept up with her life much since that evening on my front porch, but from what I knew, things hadn't been easy for her. "How are you?" I asked casually. "Oh, getting older. The body doesn't work like it used to. Sometimes I think about staying in bed in the morning because it would hurt less," she said. I laughed. I could relate to that. Jillian smiled for a moment, but then her expression turned sad. "I heard that Rebecca passed. I'm sorry, Greg," she said sincerely, which took me by surprise. "Thank you," I replied. "I miss her a lot, but she is always in my heart and on my mind every day," I said, smiling as I remembered the times Rebecca and I sat at this very table. "And," I continued, taking a breath, The kids never give me a moment's peace. Now that Becca is gone, they are making sure I stay active and take care of myself. Jillian smiled briefly, then her smile faded again. How about you? Any kids? I asked, curious. She shook her head and looked down at her coffee with regret. I never had kids, Jillian said. I was married 6 times before I realized none of them came close to what I had with the first husband. Her sad smile carried a hint of bitterness. I really messed things up, didn't I, Greg? She asked, then raised her hand. No, I know I did too. I hurt you, and then I spent so much time blaming you for things that went wrong. Every man after him, each marriage, I thought, this is it, but none of them were like you. As I looked at her, I felt a mix of emotions. I had been angry with her for a long time, longer than I should have, but now I saw a broken woman who never experienced a loving relationship. Jillian, I said, taking a breath. She looked over at me, her eyes holding a hint of hope, just like they did all those years ago. I think you need to be kinder to yourself. 6 marriages? They couldn't all have been as difficult as Troy. Surely a few of those men were good to you? For a moment, her gaze seemed distant, as if she was lost in a memory I couldn't see. You're right, Barry. My 4th husband was a kind man. And you're also right. I never truly forgave myself for what happened between us. I wanted love, but I always felt the pain I caused you. She met my gaze. I've said it before, but I am truly sorry, Greg, Jillian said softly. Thank you, Jillian. I accept your apology, I replied. It was time to move forward. We both smiled. We talked for the next few hours. I shared stories about my life with Rebecca, our kids, and our day-to-day experiences. Jillian talked about her hobbies and how she spent her time since retiring after more than 25 years in local government. Greg, you don't think that? She asked carefully as we got up from the table to go our separate ways. I smiled and shook my head. No, sorry, Jillian. I love my wife too much. Greg, I know you loved Rebecca, but she's gone. Surely there is nothing wrong. I raised my hand to stop her. Jillian, Becca and I are only apart for a little while until we can be together again. My love for her is just as strong today as it was when we met. I cannot and will not betray my wife, I explained. My words touched something deep inside Jillian. She understood the pain of her own losses. She nodded slowly. Friends, then? She asked. We'll see, Jillian. We'll see, I replied. Another decade passed before a stroke took me one Saturday afternoon. Sarah and Bridget were with me, and after lunch, I sat down to watch some TV. I was surprised it wasn't painful. My vision blurred and I felt very tired before closing my eyes. The next moment, I felt arms around my waist as I stood beside my body and saw Rebecca holding me. Becca? I asked. It's okay, my love. It's your time, she said gently. What about the kids? I asked. They will be fine, she assured me. You may not have noticed how much you've slowed down lately, but they have. They are ready. I nodded. This is real, isn't it? This isn't just a dream? I asked. She laughed softly, pulling me down for a kiss. If it is, what a lovely way to go. Kissing your wife at the end. I smiled. But no, this is as real as it gets. Look, here come the girls, Rebecca said. For the next hour, we stood together and watched as my family gathered around and shed tears. But I also heard laughter as my children shared stories about Rebecca and me, sharing memories both joyful and sad. As Rebecca and I stood together, our arms wrapped around each other, we felt proud that our family was strong and would be okay in the future, even without us. When the paramedics arrived to take my body away, Rebecca and I took turns hugging and kissing the kids. We knew it would be some time before we saw them again. They couldn't see us, just felt a soft breeze pass by. Come on, sweetheart, Rebecca said, wiping a tear from her cheek. I have a lot to show you. You're going to enjoy it. We have so much love to share. Don't I need to go see God or something? I asked. Well, yes, he's waiting for you. But don't worry, he's nice, she said with a smile. I took a moment to look at Rebecca. She looked just like she did when we first had Sarah. I felt the same too. Wait, is there fun in heaven? I asked. Rebecca smiled back at me. She looked at me with warmth in her eyes, took my hand, and began to lead me somewhere. "Come and see, my love," she said, her voice inviting. "Come and see." Hey, everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.